One minute you're on the front line, knocked unconscious by a shell blast. The next minute you wake up and you're being hauled away by German soldiers. You didn't run. You didn't raise your hands in surrender. You simply lost consciousness. But back home, your country has already executed your entire family, all because of one policy. Surrender equals treason. It doesn't matter why you were captured or how. If you're alive and your comrades are dead, your family will pay the price for you. Yesterday, I told you the story of how Stalin handled the capture of his own eldest son, Yakov. Following the iron law of surrender equals treason, Stalin threw his own daughter-in-law Yulia into prison. He had Yakov's aunt Maria Svanidze, the woman who raised him, and her husband Alexander executed. Even other relatives connected to them weren't spared. If even the supreme leader's own family couldn't escape this rule, what about everyone else? Picture this scene. You're an ordinary Soviet soldier. A shell hits your position and knocks you unconscious completely, utterly unconscious, with no ability to resist. When you come to, you're already a German prisoner of war. You are, by any sane measure, a victim. But in your country's official records, you weren't captured while severely wounded. You are a traitor who surrendered voluntarily. Once that label is stamped on your file, the fate of your family thousands of kilometers away is sealed. So here's the question. Should you really be willing to fight and die for a country like this? For a leader like this? First, I want everyone to understand one fundamental fact. In the Soviet Union at that time, you didn't have a choice. This was conscription. Whether you wanted to or not, when the draft order arrived, you packed your bag and went to the front. There was no, I don't want to go, no, I have a wife and children. Refusal meant desertion, and deserters were shot on the spot. Once you reached the front, you still couldn't run. When the order came to charge, you climbed out of that trench and moved forward. Behind you stood the blocking detachments, and they weren't there to help you fight. Their guns were aimed at their own soldiers. Take one step backward, and they had the authority to execute you on the spot, without trial. Going to the front wasn't voluntary. Running was a death sentence. The only thing you could do was try to survive amid the bullets and shells. But here's the cruelest trap of all. You were fighting with everything you had just to stay alive, and yet that surrender equals treason policy had already blocked every path to survival. And please note, the definition of surrender at that time was deliberately stretched to an absurdly broad scope. It didn't just mean walking toward the Germans with your hands up. Knocked unconscious by a shell and dragged away? Surrender. Captured while laying mines at the front line at night? Surrender. Ambushed and taken prisoner while clearing mines at the forward positions? Also surrender. Even if you were unarmed at the time, even if you were unconscious, even if your capture is perfectly understandable under any reasonable battlefield logic, none of that matters. The state only looks at the result. You are now in enemy hands, and your comrades are dead. And once this charge of treason is applied, what happens to your family, as I've explained before, can be described with one word: hell on earth. Now, let's tell this story through one specific person. His name is Ivan, a young soldier barely in his 20s, holding his position on the front line outside Moscow. The Germans launched a ferocious artillery barrage. Shells fell like a rainstorm, the explosions deafening, dirt and shards of steel flying through the air. The dugout where Ivan was sheltering took a direct hit. The shockwave threw his body into the air like a rag doll, then slammed him to the ground. His ears filled with a sharp, piercing ring. His vision went white, then total darkness. When he regained consciousness, everything had gone quiet. But it was a chilling kind of quiet. He couldn't hear his comrades' rifles, couldn't hear his officers shouting. All he could hear was a strange foreign language chattering above him, mixed with the rustling sounds of bodies being searched. The Germans were clearing the battlefield, checking every body that still drew breath. Ivan, concussed and utterly drained, didn't even have the strength to lift a finger. His head was pounding, his consciousness flickering in and out. He was completely incapable of any resistance. He couldn't even perform the physical act of surrender, couldn't even raise his hands, and so he was dragged away by the Germans, an unknowing, entirely passive prisoner. But in the Soviet official archives, an entirely different version of events would be recorded. His file wouldn't say, "This soldier was captured after being knocked unconscious by enemy shelling." No, it would say, "Ivan Petrov voluntarily surrendered to the enemy." Treason. Once that label was stamped down, it was like an iron gate crashing shut from above, separating Ivan from his family in two different worlds. The first to feel that cold blast would be Ivan's family, thousands of kilometers away in the rear. They probably lived in some gray, dusty town in the Ural Mountains, the kind of place with a single, muddy main street, a rundown sawmill, and a few rows of crooked wooden houses. Ivan's wife, Anna, with two small children, one 5, the other barely 2. Ivan's elderly mother lived with them too, helping with the kids, the whole family scraping by on Anna's meager factory wages and their military family benefits. Every day, they prayed for a letter from the front. Under the dim oil lamp, they read and reread the last note Ivan had left before being shipped out. They prayed for him to come home safe. Then, one day, someone knocked on that thin wooden door. It wasn't the postman. There was no letter they had been waiting for, day and night. It was the local Soviet official. Behind him stood an NKVD man in a leather coat, his face utterly blank. They brought no condolences, no compensation. With no expression whatsoever, they read out a brief notice. Because your son and husband, Ivan Petrov, shamefully surrendered to the enemy at the front, in accordance with order number 270 of the Supreme Command Headquarters, all benefits your family receives as a military household are hereby terminated. What did terminating all benefits actually mean? It meant that the monthly ration card, the one that let those two children have thin porridge and the old mother have a piece of bread, became worthless paper from that moment on. It meant that Anna's job at the textile mill, her only source of income in a time when everyone had to work themselves to the bone just to survive, could be taken away on the grounds that she was now the wife of a traitor. It meant that at school, the two children would be surrounded by other kids, spat on, called traitors' brats, and the teachers wouldn't intervene. Because intervening meant sympathizing with a traitor's family. In the time it took to read those few sentences, this family was pushed to the brink of ruin both materially and spiritually, in the same instant. But, for so many families, this was only the first step. If Ivan had been just an ordinary private, his family might still have been able to scrape by in some corner of that town, surviving on potatoes secretly slipped to them by a neighbor. But if Ivan was an officer, even just a junior lieutenant, or if his unit had a sensitive designation, or simply because the local NKVD needed to meet their quota of purge targets from above and needed an example, then the punishment would escalate immediately. His family wouldn't even have the right to scrape by in that town. On a freezing cold morning, before the sun was even up, the NKVD would knock on that door again. This time, they weren't there to read a notice. They ordered Anna, the old mother, and the two children to pack whatever they could carry in 30 minutes. Then they herded them all onto a train. Not a passenger car. A cattle car sealed tight, no windows, no seats, nothing but a thin layer of stinking straw on the floor. The destination of this train was called a special settlement. The name sounds like someplace with houses and gardens. In reality, it was a labor colony in the frozen wilderness of Siberia or Kazakhstan. When they arrived, they were driven into crude wooden barracks with wind whistling through every crack in the walls. In winter, the freezing air blasted through the gaps between the planks. People sleeping on the wooden bunks woke up with frost in their hair. Anna and the elderly mother were assigned to logging or mining, back-breaking manual labor that even strong young men couldn't endure for long. And the daily food ration was so meager it barely kept a soul tethered to the body. Ivan's mother, old and frail, would likely not survive that first long dark winter. She would die quietly of hunger, of typhus, and be buried in an unmarked grave in the frozen earth. And the two children, they might die from a simple bout of pneumonia, something entirely treatable, because there were no medicines at all. An entire family, silently, in some frozen corner of the wasteland, wiped off the face of the earth. And Ivan, struggling to survive in a German POW camp thousands of miles away, knew absolutely nothing about any of it. Every morning, he woke up at the point of a bayonet, ate a bowl of watery soup with a few rotten cabbage leaves floating in it, and spent the day doing slave labor, repairing railways, hauling stones. The only thing keeping him alive was that image in his head of the little town in the Urals, of the family waiting for him to come home, his wife's face, his children's laughter, his old mother bustling by the stove. He clung to that image through the hunger, through the beatings, through every night when he wanted to run into the electric fence and end it all. He didn't know he couldn't imagine that everyone in that picture was already gone, destroyed by the very charge of treason that had been pinned on him. And the story doesn't end there. There's another ending, an even crueler one. Let's say Ivan's camp was later liberated by the Allies. He survived. After untold hardship walking, clinging to freight trains, hitching rides, he finally set foot on the soil of his motherland. In that moment, he might have fallen to his knees and kissed the ground because he thought he was home, but he didn't know the real hell was just beginning. He was immediately taken to an NKVD filtration camp. There, he wasn't a hero, wasn't a survivor. He was a potential traitor who needed to be interrogated over and over again. In countless interrogation sessions, he desperately, repeatedly explained, "I was knocked out by a shell. When I woke up, I was already in German hands. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't surrender." The interrogator just stared at him coldly and asked the one question that, in that era, could kill any person. Why did everyone else die in battle, and only you survived? That question itself contained everything. The fact that you're alive, that is your crime. Let's say Ivan was one of the lucky few who passed the filtration after countless sleepless nights of terror. His name didn't end up on that list marked transfer to labor camp. With a heart pounding almost out of his chest, he set out on the final leg of the journey back to his hometown. He had rehearsed this scene in his mind 1,000 times, pushing open the courtyard gate, his wife running out of the house, his children throwing themselves into his arms. But when he pushed open that gate, what he saw was an overgrown, abandoned yard. The door to the house was wide open. Inside, nothing. The furniture was gone. Thick dust covered the floor. He ran to the neighbors and pounded on their door. The neighbor cracked it open, eyes full of fear and avoidance. They didn't dare talk to him for long, just muttered quickly, "They were taken away! Don't come looking for us anymore!" and slammed the door shut. After asking everywhere from an old woman who had once secretly given his mother a piece of bread from a yellowing document buried in the corner of the town Soviet office, he finally pieced together that devastating, earth-shattering truth. His wife, his children, his old mother, because he had been branded a traitor, had all been exiled long ago to some unknown place. Most likely, none of them were alive anymore. This was the final reward his motherland gave him, after everything he endured in that POW camp. He came home alive, only to discover that his own country's laws had already ground his family into dust. From that point on, he would live as an untrusted, lonely ghost, not a veteran, not a hero, but a man whose file was forever marked with the word suspicious. This is the perfect tragedy manufactured by that rigid and brutal policy. With those 4 words, surrender equals treason, it completely sealed off every possibility for a soldier in an impossible situation except dying in battle. It terrorized the soldiers on the front line in the most extreme way. Charge forward and you might die. Step back and you will die. Get captured and your family dies for you. You have no choice. The only thing you can do is die. And at the same time, this policy mercilessly destroyed countless families who had done absolutely nothing wrong. These families bore a double blow. First, they lost their loved one on the battlefield, a son, a husband, a father, without even seeing his face one last time, without even receiving a formal notification of death. Then, because of the label of traitor that the state forcibly pinned on that loved one, they lost their home, their dignity, and their right to exist. This entire mechanism was built on 2 brutally cold principles: absolute suspicion and collective punishment. Suspicion meaning the state trusted none of its captured soldiers, regardless of the specific circumstances of their capture. Collective punishment meaning the so-called crime of one person could be borne by his entire family. It used tragedies like the Ivan families, multiplied across countless households, to pile up a defensive line of so-called iron will. But the foundation of that defensive line wasn't heroism. It wasn't loyalty. It was the deepest cruelty and injustice toward its own people. This history reminds us of one thing: any absolute order that leaves no room for humanity, no matter how lofty the words draped over it. Motherland. Victory. Iron will is, in its essence, barbarism.